how am I ever going to save 10 grand? Like that is, to me, 10 grand was like £1 million, bro. It was like in a city like London, because I was like living out, I was paying rent, I was very social, I was like eating out all the time. And I was like, how am I ever going to save 10 grand? That is so obscene. And if I could tell you what that felt like to me at the time, that is how like far away I was to like my level of literacy now. And to think that there was that person there, and now I'm this commentator on the internet telling people about money, it's night and day. But your circumstances and what you know and understand of the world can be changed in an instant.
Welcome to the Muslim Pound podcast. Today we have Niaz Azad, the co-founder of Millennial Money. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome salam. Okay, today we're going to start off with something random. So I went into ChatGPT and I said, I'm speaking to Niaz Azad today, so give me a random question to ask. And first he just come up with all Millennial Money questions. I said, no, I prompted it again. I said, give me a very random question. So I said, if money doesn't exist, what would you spend your life doing? And I thought, okay, that's actually a good start.
That's a very good question. So funny enough, I've actually thought about this, bro. Because the whole question of money was no object. And some of the things that I used to enjoy, just generally, as a kid, not even as a kid, as a young adult, like I would be so enthralled by documentaries. Like before YouTube was a big thing, documentaries were where you got like niche bits of information.
Yeah.
And I used to just really enjoy like documentaries, and also I really appreciated filmmaking. I think back in the day it was like we had people like Reggie Yates and all them who used to do loads of documentaries. Louis Theroux obviously used to do loads of cool documentaries. And then at the same time I'd appreciate like beautiful filmmaking. And the amount of research that goes into producing things like that, it's a way of like exploring curiosity that unless you had a real reason to, you wouldn't do it. So I think if money was an object, genuinely, I'd probably be a documentary filmmaker.
What kind of documentaries would you make?
Honestly, it's so open. Like, easy thing to say is go and exploring loads of different cultures, right? I love to travel. But I think I wouldn't limit myself. I'd use it just as like an excuse to learn about new things.
Yeah.
Podcasting is like a small way of doing that because you get to chat to loads of people and learn about them. But on more than one occasion, I thought it'd be so cool to like be a documentary filmmaker, like seeing something from like start to finish and making it beautiful. Inshallah, one day we'll see it. I think that's something that I'd enjoy.
Have you set an idea on a kind of documentary you want to make like later on, even for a business?
I've thought about like short films.
Yeah.
That sounds strange, like because I don't have skills for filmmaking. I guess that we put out content and stuff as well, right? But there's like different things that I would explore, like different themes. It could be like recently I've been thinking, this is so random, but recently I've been thinking about like parenthood and like as the ages we're becoming, maybe becoming parents for the first time in our demographic. And watching our parents get older, appreciating the relationship between and like the complexities of parenthood. Again, that sounds really like holier than thou, but that's just been one that I've thought about recently. Food as well, bro. Exploring different cultures through food. I know it's a bit like Anthony Bourdain, what he used to do, that kind of stuff. But
food is good as well because when you're going through different cultures, you just see like different types of food and
100%.
And especially if you're a foodie, like,
yeah.
as we all are.
Yeah, bro.
Okay, so you're talking about parenthood and stuff like that. So how was your kind of upbringing?
Yeah.
And you were brought up in East London.
Yeah.
We probably have a similar background. So how was your upbringing?
Massive. So I have grown to like really appreciate my childhood. I had quite an interesting childhood. Both my parents had a significant influence, as they would, into like who I've become. We were lucky enough that my mum was home with us most of our childhood. So we had her, like she raised us. She was basically a full-time mother and nourished us, like raised us. My dad, obviously, he went out. He was a businessman. So we grew up watching him work very hard and provide opportunities for us. And they had like different personalities that came together mainly to just provide as much as possible for me and my siblings. It's the typical like work hard immigrant mindset, isn't it? And they just wanted to give us the best life possible. So I grew up in So initially, at the start of my life, we were in Tower Hamlets, actually, which I recently discussed on a podcast with my brother for the first time, which people don't really expect of us. So we were in like a very working class environment. But it was funny because at the same time, it's probably when my dad, at that period, was also a very successful businessman. So we had a very polarized view of things. And it never really mattered to us because it was like we could see a lot of, like, I guess, perceived wealth. But equally, we were in very working class environments at the same time. And I think that gave us quite a unique perception, or me and my siblings, a unique perception of money.
In what way?
We never felt like we didn't have enough. But at the same time, I feel like maybe we knew not to take money for granted. So whilst we were in Tower Hamlets, there was a period that I spent living in council estates, right? But at the same time, we went to private schools later on in life.
Okay.
So the disparity is huge there, right? So we were surrounded by people who were super working class, relying on the state. And then fast forward a few years, we experienced a lot of privilege as well, right? And I think that's given me and my siblings a very unique, like, take on life.
How did that change happen? Because from council estate to private school is a proud moment for parents, of course.
Yeah.
But then even for yourself, like, how did that change happen?
I honestly didn't notice it naively. So because so even when we were living in Tower Hamlets in the council estate, it was mainly me and my siblings didn't really experience too much of it. They were quite young. You just know what you're experiencing, right? You don't know any different.
Yeah.
So to me, I didn't know that we were in like a very working class environment at that period of time. My dad worked internationally. He had a lot of international businesses. And it was actually when my sister was born, he was like, right, I need to be more present in London. He came, and obviously he sold off his businesses and had cash surplus, and he actually moved his business into property.
Okay.
And so my dad benefited from the property markets from the 2000s and investing early in that in that property market and benefiting from that. And so we've seen, obviously, we benefited from like the boom in those markets, right? And then he reinvested effectively any of that wealth into making sure that me and my siblings were educated. So it was an interesting experience when I first went to like a private school. I remember I walked in and I had like, my tie was short, shirt untucked, I was wearing feelers, and I walked into Hogwarts and I was like, what is going on? But you adjust, and I think it's probably meant that I've grown up with a much more rounded experience, because if you only experience one of those things, you have no idea how the other half lives, right?
What was the demographic in the private school at that time?
Obviously less diverse than you get in an East London school. But there was, so me and one of my best friends, he's actually relatively famous now as a famous reporter. We were the only two Bangladeshi kids in our year. But it was diverse. I can't say it was diverse. There was some Asian kids. There were only two black students in our year. And they both left by the time I was in year 9. And then obviously majority white. Because
the state schools, as you know, would be 99% Asians.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the schools, Stratford School, it had like someone's class had like 10 Patels. Because everyone just got the same Patel. So obviously they were mainly Asians, and it wasn't diverse, but it was diverse at the same time. So that's quite interesting as well. Yeah. So looking back at your education now, do you think you were pushed into education, or was it something that you felt, no, this is what you needed to do, like out of your own accord? So coming back to my dad's influence, so our parental influence in our lives. So my dad always had a huge emphasis on education and wanting us to be educated. And I think that comes from him through his own circumstances not being able to become educated. So my dad was a successful businessman, and he found himself in rooms often, right, where he would be wealthier than everyone in the room, but he would feel
sometimes, I don't know if inadequate is the right word, but he would.
Like imposter syndrome.
Yeah, he would feel the imposter syndrome because he was the one that wasn't educated.
Yeah.
Even though he made more of a success of himself in certain fields, right? And I think because of that, he had a real insistence on his children becoming educated. I would say we still obviously applied ourselves, but we aren't like the typical. And alhamdulillah, especially my sister, alhamdulillah, Allahumma barik, she did really well in school. We all did like pretty well in school, but I would say a lot of that was because of the encouragement of our parents, rather than completely off our own accord. And I think my dad probably recognized that in myself. I'm the kind of person that will become whatever my environment is. So if you put me in a real studious environment, I'll do really well. But if you put me in an environment with lots of distractions when I was a kid, I'd get distracted. And I think he recognized that early on.
How many siblings do you have altogether?
I have a younger brother and a younger sister.
So you're the eldest. I was same as me. So I've got one younger brother, one younger sister.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Okay, so how did it feel being the eldest kid?
Bro, I was literally thinking about this on the drive here. The pressures on elder siblings, and obviously like how no one probably understands it. And I'm sure we don't really understand the different pressures that a younger sibling have.
Or middle childhood.
Exactly. But my brother and sister will be sick of me hearing it. But even to this day, there's a different kind of pressure being elder sibling. I think I grew up with a feeling that like I wasn't allowed to fail.
Yeah.
And it's a different kind of pressure because I have to kind of like shoulder a lot of burdens and make my parents feel comfortable with certain things so that my siblings, it will be easier for them, right? For example, like the decisions I make in terms of career, what I studied, and like trying new things or moving outside of like whatever our parents' comfort zone was. I had to be the first to do it to then make it easier for my siblings to try the same things. But that has led to is I feel like my siblings are much more comfortable with risk taking and are a lot more fearless. And I would say I'm quite a big risk taker, but I put extra pressure on myself that I'm not allowed to fail. And I think that actually is because of being the eldest, you know?
Is that partly because I think this as well, but is that partly because that when you grow older, there's going to come a time where you're going to be the head of household? And you will have that responsibility over your siblings. Yeah. Because they naturally, because you're the eldest. Yeah,
and they will inadvertently even lean on you for certain things. So I think it's a privilege and a responsibility. And I do think, because sometimes I'm like, obviously there's times where you feel like a bit of a victim, right? You're like, like, why do I have to think about all this? Like, why is it just me that has to take all this pressure? But actually, I think it is a privilege, you know, to be able to like take on that role. And I think so. I think parents kind of see you in these traditional setups anyway, naturally as like, okay, if anything was to happen to me, you're the one that has to step up. Therefore, you need to be more capable of certain things. Not more capable as a person, but just more capable of certain things. And I need to see from you that you are going to be able to step up.
So I've seen that in my parents, because my dad's the eldest, my mum's the second eldest of 6. So I've seen that. Yeah. My mum's kind of the person that her family leans on in certain aspects, and my dad's the eldest. Yeah. So he gives that advice, and my grandfather, when he's wants any tips or whatever, he goes to my dad as well first. So I've seen that, and I've seen it trickling down as well to me. So like my dad would ask me stuff and mum would ask me stuff. It generally comes to me first because I'm the eldest, and then that responsibility comes, and I'm the eldest grandchild and the second eldest grandchild on my mum's side. So I feel like I've got the responsibility of a lot of the cousins as well.
It's so funny, isn't it? So for me, I would say my siblings would also kind of frame it differently in my family. I think it's more subtle. Mine is more like responsibilities and tasks are kind of even unspoken, just like assumed on me that I'll pick it up. Because I think because of my personality, my siblings would be like, oh, he's the most immature, just because I'm quite a friendly like person and I like to sort of make light of things, right? But then I've noticed that when it is something serious that really requires any attention, naturally, like my parents would probably turn to me. I like to think my siblings would as well, just by way of experience, right? And assuming that role. But if you ask my siblings, they'll probably be like, he's the most immature one, right?
No, that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
What was your first job? What was your first ever job? Retail? What was it?
I was a tutor.
Okay.
Yeah, I did tutoring when I was studying. So it was quite random actually, because I think it was just easy. Because when I was studying, I had a tutor to help me with maths, weirdly, because I was always good at the humanities and stuff, and my maths was a bit higgy. And then I did fairly well in my GCSEs and my A levels, or did well in my GCSEs, and naturally, I think the tutor that he was expanding, and he was like, "Do you want to teach the younger kids?" I was like, yeah, sure. And then kind of stepped into that role. It was actually, honestly, it was such a good first job when I think about it, because I hear like some of my friends who worked in retail and stuff like that. I've done one stint in retail. Bro, never again. Obviously, never again, inshallah. I've done one stint in retail. But tutoring, I was paid really well. Just to rock up on a weekend, do a couple of hours, cash in hand.
I actually enjoyed retail. I don't know why.
Where did you do it?
I'm Wilkinson. I've done next sales.
Next sales as well.
Next sales. Bro. I enjoyed it. I don't know why I enjoyed it.
Just the rush, bro.
Probably because there's something to do.
I did one summer in River Island.
Okay. No, never again.
Yeah. Wasn't for me, man.
I've done Wilkinson, but that was customer facing. But at the same time, I used to do the evening shift, so a lot of it was just stocking shelves.
Oh, really?
Which I didn't mind.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like I wasn't cut out for retail, man. I just used to get so bored, and yeah, it just wasn't for me.
But yeah, hopefully never again.
Yeah, exactly, inshallah.
So Millennial Money, let's talk about Millennial Money. You started that before COVID, just before COVID, right?
Just before COVID, yeah. So I think we were quite fortunately timed in that me and a friend of mine have been planning this for a while through personal experience even, right? And not fully feeling qualified enough to understand or appreciate the conversation of money. And it being like a real frustration, because we were like, we've done everything like that we were told we were supposed to do. Like, we've gone to school, got these good grades, went to uni, we've got so-called good jobs. Like, bro, I have no idea what's going on still. Like, I'm such an imposter. And then from having conversations with our friends and like trying to open up that conversation a bit more, we realized that it was a shared experience. So me and one of my friends who was my co-founder, we were like, there's something here. Why don't we like just try? And it was such a abstract idea, but we were just like, okay, why don't we just try and like knock our heads together a little bit? And we came together. Another one of our friends, fortunately at the time, he was setting up his own like brand agency. But like, we want to make a brand. Like, let's think about something. And that's, I think, where it was born. And we had been doing all like the branding process, going through all of that, trying to understand what our values would be. What is it that we're going to be trying to talk about? And COVID happened. And we kind of just messaged each other like, should we just launch? Like, people are home, like on their phones, everyone's thinking about money. We launched, and it was just, I think, perfect timing, where it all came together. And since then, it's developed into a bigger multimedia brand.
So what was your initial objective?
I think just to engage people, and it still is to this day, like if we were to completely simplify it, is to engage young people. I say young people like very broadly because I'll put myself in that category, even though some would disagree. Young people with the conversation of money. So like generationally, I would say millennials and younger have a very unique experience of money, right? We didn't have the housing market that our parents may have enjoyed, right? We didn't have other like investment opportunities. And then we had huge financial crises that we're recovering from at the time when we're reaching wealth accumulation phases of our lives, right? But at the same time, we have different opportunities as well.
Yeah.
Digital world and becoming digitally native as a generation as well. And the fact that we probably can't entirely learn from our mentors and parents' generation. Of course, there's so much wisdom that we can take from them, but some of their advice might not completely apply to our world, right? And a good way for us to learn is actually from each other, like peer to peer, because we have similar experiences.
Yeah.
And we wanted to basically open up a forum to engage and create a space for everyone to feel like, oh, let me join this community where I can have these conversations in a way that isn't judgmental, where I don't feel stupid because I don't understand. And that's where it was born, really.
Was it more for people to come and say, look, I've got this money issue or this budgeting issue, or only have £100 a month
Yeah.
left, because that's the level we're living at. Some people have way less than £100 a month.
Yeah.
So is that and then you want people to come together and kind of find the solution themselves?
No. Yeah, like we provide a lot of like resources so that people can learn about money, but I think it was broader than specific problems. It was like looking at the symptoms of what our generation was experiencing because of like the economy that we were in, because of the financial climate that we were in. So at the time of COVID, it's pretty scary. People were getting laid off work. There was furlough. There was all these other things. But at the same time, people also found that they might have had a lot more disposable income because they were staying home the whole time, right? And then like learning about investing for the first time and having all of those conversations. So it was just like broadly educative, but peer-to-peer education. And like teaching people with money, trying to make people feel confident about speaking about money. Again, it came from personal need. So like in my friendship group, for in school, majority of my friends, I'd say like more than 60 to 70% of them work in finance. So like in investment banking, and like some of them work in PE and stuff now. And I work in law, right? So I'd be in conversations with them and they'd be saying all this stuff full of jargon. I'd be sat there going, what's going on? Let me just smile and nod, right? And that is because the world of money is just full of a load of jargon.
Yeah.
And I had the experience of feeling, as a very educated man, feeling pretty stupid sometimes because I was like, what are they talking about? Like, what is this PE ratio? And like, what are they talking about funds and stuff? I don't understand. And then when you come to learn, you realize it's actually not that difficult. It's just a lot of unnecessary jargon sometimes. So how can other people be made to feel a lot more confident about money? And that's initially how a lot of it started.
It's basically you're just simplifying the message.
Yeah.
And making it clear that, okay, this is what stocks are, this is what investment funds are, etc.
Yeah. And try to make everyone feel like they can have a voice in that conversation because it impacts everyone ultimately. I think back then a bit more so in our generation, from what I could see, there was a bit more of a culture of, oh, like I'm just someone that's bad with money, and we'd laugh about it, right? It's like the health thing as well. Like in Britain, there is to some extent still like people kind of make light of the fact that they have poor health. You know, I'm just a bit like, I don't really, I just eat a bit like this, and I'm just a bit careless when it comes to my health, right? Yeah. And money, it was a similar thing with money as well. And I think we're trying to engage people to be like, it doesn't have to be this way,
You mentioned you were working in law. You're still working in law, right? Yeah. So how are you juggling the both? And especially when you first started, because a lot of hours and a lot of passion goes into the side hustle. Along with your main job. Yeah, it's tough.
I still don't know if I've got it completely right to get on almost 5 years in, almost 5 years in. A lot of evenings and weekends. And now it's a lot easier than at the start because obviously once you build a bit more of a reputation, your brand kind of carries itself. And there are periods like this year, I think we've taken a bit more of a backseat. With everything else happening in the world in Palestine and everything, I think we just took a bit more of like a backseat when it came to our content.
Why did you feel the need to do that? Because you're still serving people who are in need as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. It is a mixture of...
It's conflicting.
It's not a conflict, but it was a mixture of like energy and where to channel energy, what seemed more important.
Yeah.
To be honest, that's how it was. And I felt like in certain periods, it just didn't feel as appropriate to put out or put effort into certain bits of content when I was like, I'd rather be engaging with a lot of the other stuff that we were seeing in that acute period.
Because it puts life in perspective.
100%, man. SubhanAllah, 100%. It really does put life into perspective of what we've seen over the last 18 months.
Yeah.
But yeah, to go back to your original point about how juggling it, at the start, but at the start, you also have like this renewed passion and energy whenever you're launching something, right? So it didn't feel like hard work. It was kind of cool. Like me and my friend were like putting this stuff and people were like responding to it and it was gaining traction and it was cool. Like it was funny because it was like, obviously now since then we've had like really big achievements in on occasion as well, but they kind of didn't weigh the same as the really small, now looking back, small early achievements. I remember when we got like our first 1,000 followers, first video that got like 1,000 views, right? Since then, we've got hundreds of thousands of views on certain things. But that felt more special because it was new and novel at the time.
Was that your like first target? We're going to get 1,000 followers.
Honestly, I didn't really even set any targets like that. But at the same time, I say that at the same time, we always treated it like a business.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, we monetized quite early on. And it became a business quite early on. There was no like, we need to reach X, Y, Z. It was like, let's see where this goes, and let's see how we can grow it organically.
So how did you monetize it early?
Brand partnerships.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we were quite insistent that our branding was going to be really strong. And now I think people misunderstand social media because they look at vanity metrics and they mistake that for ultimate value. But if you actually are in the world of social media and marketing, you realize that those vanity metrics almost don't even matter anymore.
Yeah.
They do to a certain extent, but they almost don't matter anymore. Like I know, for example, to certain brands, we've charged as much as other people I know in the industry with millions of followers because of how you market something and the value you're providing, right? And I always said quite early on, I don't know why, I don't know what got into me, maybe I was just a bit too brave, but I'd go into early pitches with brands and from the start, even when we had no clout, really, I'd be like, listen, we're a bit more expensive than other people, but this is what you're going to get for it. Because I really cared about like our brand, like the way it looks aesthetically as well, the information that's in there, the tone of our voice, how the audiences that we reached. And because of that, I think like I felt confident standing behind our brand.
So why would brands, it's quite interesting, why would brands pay the same amount to you compared to another company who has millions of followers or millions of views?
Trust.
Okay, so how did you build that trust?
They test with us sometimes. So I'd say our price, and a lot of the time, when it comes to financial services in particular, we operate in the personal finance space. Let's say, for example, an investment company. This is an example, none that necessarily that we worked on, but a case study. An investment company or a pension provider wants to work with a financial content creator, right? When people bank or when they invest with someone, they tend to do it for a very long time, and it's quite hard to get people to switch.
Yeah.
So let's say a £5,000 to £10,000 investment they make in a marketing campaign with a content creator, that could pay off for 10, 15, 20 years from one conversion. Yeah.
Okay.
That's why usually when it comes to finance and personal finance, it's the highest paying area of like the content world. Even on YouTube, you have their CPAs, CPM, sorry. Usually the money,
finance funds,
they pay the most because the brands that are advertising pay the most.
Yeah.
And then I think after that, it's like gambling and sports and stuff like that, obviously, which is stuff that we don't engage in. But the finance brands will always pay the most because they benefit the most from conversions. And sorry, just to finish on your point of the people with millions of followers, the millions of followers don't necessarily mean that each one of those followers trust them for everything.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of the time very rarely you're going to have businesses with millions of followers, but you have people with millions of followers. But the people with millions of followers aren't necessarily specialized in finance, for example. They'll have a lot of followers that might just like enjoy their lifestyle.
Yeah.
And follow them for one certain thing, but you don't know how many of those would listen to them about money, for example.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a brand that is very focused on a specific demographic that you're trying to reach,
people are watching you.
Yeah, then it makes sense to like narrow down who you're going to be marketing through.
Yeah.
And when you have broad net of followers, it's hard to really know there's like multiple demographics within that, right?
Yeah. And if you're getting good views on even 10,000 views, which isn't considered that much in this day and age, but I actually read something on LinkedIn. If you get 2,000 views, imagine a room with 2,000 people.
Yeah, bro, it's crazy. Yeah.
So even if you get, example, 10,000 views, because they're watching you, they know that it's related to money. Whereas, I don't know, Sidemen example would be, it's just entertainment, isn't it?
Of course, yeah.
And they'll get millions of views,
exactly,
but they might not get the 10,000 people looking at for money.
Yeah, exactly.
So what were the kind of first conversations you had with people when you like first launched in regards to their personal finances?
So obviously we don't like advise people directly. We don't even coach people directly, but we do it with a broad net through our content. Like we always considered our content to be like things that people feel like they enjoy engaging with, but learn from at the same time. Initially, I think when we started out, it was a lot, because it was COVID, a lot of it was about budgeting, saving, like setting the good like golden principles when it comes to personal finance, things like that, right? Helping people understand like why they need to save in a certain way, having like emergency funds in place, understanding how to get out of debt if they were in debt, and then looking at building out longer term goals and investments, for example. So it was very introductory level. But the thing that struck us is to this day, like what seems very basic and introductory to us, to a lot of people, that's like, whoa, like, I don't do any of that. I need to really set myself up. I didn't know these things, because none of us are taught about money, right?
Yeah.
We're not taught about, like, I have a workshop that I run, which for years I've run, which is called What They Don't Teach You in Money About School, What They Don't Teach You in School About Money. And it always lands. And I always think it's going to land with like the younger audiences. If I do it in like a corporate business, I always think, oh, like the junior people are going to be really but there's people who are like senior director level that come up to me afterwards like, yo, like I need to sort out my pension, man. Like I need to think about all of that, because most people haven't thought about this stuff.
Yeah, of course. So in terms of like budgeting, what kind of tips do you kind of give to people in terms of just like people who are like, okay, look, we need to, if you save £500, it doesn't mean that's, and you leave in the bank account, you're not counting for inflation. Whereas if you put it in stocks or you put it in something else, what kind of things are you seeing discussed or you discuss on your workshops?
The first thing completely, and I think I kind of tried to disarm the audience by saying like my natural self is really bad with money. Like my natural instinct is not to be sensible, right? And the way to prevent that for anyone is to, first of all, hold yourself accountable. And the way to hold yourself accountable is to put it in front of you so you can't kid yourself. And that a lot of the time is in the form of a budget. And whenever people used to say, oh, budgeting, I'd just be like, shut up, man. I'm not going to budget. Like, that sounds so boring. But you don't have to budget debt like this. Not everyone has to budget the same way, right? You need to find a way that is going to suit you and you're going to stick to it and be able to actually hold yourself accountable properly. And the first place to start in most simple terms is actually understand what you've got coming in and going out.
An audit.
A complete audit of yourself. And it's actually a behavioral audit, really, when you do it, right? When you know how much you have to start with, and then at the end of each month, you're seeing exactly what's going out. You're forced to really read it.
Uber Eats.
Yeah. Do you know what? I realized over the last couple of years? That was one of my biggest expenses. I stopped recently, so it was needed for a health kick. But it's so easy to rack that up. And first point for everyone is just to hold yourself accountable, because as soon as you do that, you're going to be like, oh my days, I'm actually spending X amount here. This is so unnecessary. And really having an understanding of what you have to start, your starting point, what you have coming in, and then what you have going out. And hopefully, at the start, that this outgoing doesn't outweigh the incoming. And if it does, then that's where we need to start. A very basic level is to make sure that what you have coming in and what you have to start with outweighs what you have going out.
But also you need to know what you should have left as well.
Exactly.
So the way I kind of do it, so I have a Starling account and you got spaces. So automatically my savings go at the end of each month. My savings go into one space, my bills go in another space. I can't remember what other space I have, but they're just automatic, so I don't really need to think about it. So that's kind of my way of budgeting. So I know I've left with X amount at the beginning of the month, and that's what I have to spend. And it's as simple as that.
100%, and it's a good way to be organized, especially if you're someone. Some people are really good, bro. Some people can go line by line and like completely, like line by line, understand how to control themselves. I can't do that. I have to give myself a bit of room to breathe. So I try to look at it in, like you said, in like bigger chunks of like, first of all, you have your fixed costs that are non-negotiable. Like you can't just decide you're not going to pay your rent or your mortgage.
You'd be surprised.
Of course, I'm sure.
You'll be surprised.
I'm sure you might see differently sometimes, but that is something that, of course, you shouldn't consider a negotiable, right?
Yeah.
So all of your fixed costs, I like to call that the amount it costs to exist.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a calculation that everyone needs to figure out. You wake up, especially in a city like London, it's quite a lot. You wake up and there's a tax on you breathing, basically, right? So you need to figure out how much it costs for you to exist, which might be for some people, I don't know, anywhere from 500 to up to 3-4 grand. Like who knows? Like depending on what their costs are. But that could be your the bills you have to pay, your rent, your mortgage, if you have one, and other fixed expenses, your subscriptions, right? And then outside of that, you obviously have your variable expenses, which are things that aren't the exact same amount each month, but you need groceries, you need food, you need to make all of those expenses. And together you have a cost, right? A list of your expenses. And that's a good way to start. Now, you know a number that you can never go below.
Yeah.
That is something that you have to have. Hopefully, after that, you have a bit of a surplus. So you know that's your cost to get you by, right? And then once you have a surplus, if you have no debt, hopefully, inshallah, if you've dealt with your debt, once you've dealt with your debt, then you can start thinking about your short, medium, and longer term goals. And short term might be cash savings that you need in the short term, which everyone needs at any moment in time, whether that's in the form of an emergency fund or saving towards more short term goals. Medium term, I don't know, big expenses that you might have coming up. And then your longer term, I like to consider the money that you invest for the long term, right? Which invest for the long term is a thing that we need to make sure that we nail down. Because when people learn about investing for the first time, they get spooked, right? But it's a longer term game. And that's something that we need to start encouraging as well.
And then they also think, oh, I've only got £10 spare. What am I going to do with £10?
Exactly, yeah.
Don't realise that £10 a month could end up being 180 quid rather than 120 quid.
Yeah, 100%.
But going back to your earlier point, or they don't teach in schools, why? Why don't they teach in schools?
So some people, there's like mixed views, right? Some people have a real conspiracy theory,
one of them.
Yeah, which is like the whole control element. Okay, we can sort of explore that as well, right? The school system that exists today, I think, is a Victorian school system, right? And that, if you think about the context of Britain back then, we lived in an industrialized society, lots of factories. Britain was one of the biggest economies, if not the biggest economy in the world, right? Because of its industries, factories. And what it was teaching in school was or what it was preparing kids for in school was to go and join the factories, basically, to have a sufficient education to become part of the industrial economy, right? So everything that they taught in school kind of would be to the limits of anything that you need to know to join the industrial workforce. That is one of the theories that people say as well. My view is that is very likely that could be true. I think that is my view because of the limitations of the education system, which hasn't really changed too much, right? But my view is that even teachers don't really understand money, bro.
Yeah.
I think there's a generational knowledge gap when it comes to financial literacy. So who is meant to teach money when even there's a multi-generation of people that don't understand money fully, right?
But I think that's when it comes to people like yourself.
Yeah.
Schools should be approaching, or councils should be approaching.
Yeah.
Look, can you run 12-month workshops or 9 months, or having the schools run for in schools 2 weeks at a time?
Yeah.
And as simple as that.
Yeah.
So that way you're teaching
kids.
Yeah,
100%. And then there's the question in between where they say that if everyone became financially literate, would it be good for the economy? Which is a bad way to think as well, of course, because I think you should lean into the fact that society would innovate itself and be much more sensible, because the economy also relies on people spending money, especially like the kind of economy that we have, right? Of like commerce. It relies on people spending money. So we need to encourage those kind of behaviors to keep the economy going. If you remember in COVID, do you remember contactless used to have a limit on it?
Yeah.
It's now unlimited.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was to encourage spending. It wasn't to protect people. It was to encourage further spending. So it was actually to encourage frivolity because they had to think about the economy at the time.
But that's short-term thinking.
Exactly.
Because long-term, if a person makes more money, they're going to spend more.
Exactly, yeah.
Someone's going to buy, rather than a Fiat 500, they're going to buy a BMW.
Yeah,
that's
exactly. 100%. And then it comes to the point that do governments ever think long-term? Because they often come in for 5 years. They don't know that they're confirmed for a term beyond that. So they have to think about what they can achieve in that shorter term period. And actually, a lot of the time when it comes to solving society's problems, it requires much bolder, longer term thinking. And I don't know, the limits of our political system, does that mean that they just think very selfishly of like, what can we achieve in the short term rather than longer term?
Yeah, probably because they don't want to be the start of something. They want to say, I've got, I don't know, 20,000 more police officers.
Yeah.
Rather than gradually we've trained up.
Yeah.
But then they have to complement the Tories or the Labour, whoever.
Exactly. But I completely agree with you that financial literacy needs more focus in schools. And we've tried to engage with, and on occasion we have engaged with schools. At the moment, we're doing better with businesses. So working with corporate businesses, that's part of like what we do as well, in training their junior members of staff. But actually, like, everyone benefits from it. So what we've been doing a little bit is going in and running workshops with like new trainees, for example, that join big corporate businesses. And we've got feedback that that's one of the sessions that they enjoy the most in their training, because they're like, okay, like, I didn't never really understood this about money. And bro, I would have benefited so much from that at the start of my career. For example, at the start of my career, I got really bad advice for 2 years. Someone told me like, oh, like opt out of your pension in it because otherwise they won't give you a bonus. Obviously, that was a lie.
Yeah.
I believed it. So I missed out on 2 years of pension contributions from my employer and the tax relief on that as well. And I've had to make up for that later in life, you know? And that's just because of like silly literacy or lack of literacy when it comes to finances and the advice that I took from a colleague.
So when you're approaching schools, what's the kind of response you're getting? Because I think it's really important as it is to go to businesses, especially the juniors, because they get for them it's complete new money from coming fresh out of uni, part-time job. You know, you're now 30, 35 grand.
Yeah.
And what do you do with it? Let's go party. That's the way it is. Yeah. So, but what's the response you're getting from schools?
To be honest, bro, we haven't been doing too much proactive outreach in schools. They reach out to us sometimes. Okay. And perhaps this is a good prompt that we should think about doing more outreach. Usually when it comes to schools, we offer it as a free service because it's schools and we know how stretched they are. And because it's not a paid service, it's probably not high up on our priorities. But we have done it on occasion. And I think we need to focus in on it a bit more. And the wider money content creator community, I think, generally has those ambitions. And I know some of my colleagues, they do reach out to schools more. But I think there needs to be like a concerted, broader effort nationally to improve financial literacy.
Do you think we should target more schools and unis more than, colleges and uni rather than schools? Yeah. Because when I don't remember what I learned at 14.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're
college.
Yeah.
And that's when people are thinking
starting, maybe get their first jobs. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely
right. Although the basics of learning how to pay bills, what is a bill, why do you need to pay a bill, learning what is PAYE, why the government take money, why your pay slip isn't what you think it is. Yeah. Because we've had that here. Someone's like, oh, this is my salary, I've got less. And what's this PAYE? I said, it's tax. Yeah. I had to explain what tax was. Yeah. Funny enough, he was an accounting student.
Oh, really? Because how would you know, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's true. I actually think, so my view is, and maybe this is me being a bit too much of putting my business hat on as well. I actually think the greatest benefit comes from those who are just starting their first jobs and having like a training session, because obviously that's what we do. That remains high on our priority list, because obviously we often get paid for that as well, which means naturally we'll make sure that it's high on our list of priorities. But it's directly relevant to them here and now, so they're not going to forget it, because I will sit there and I'll say to them, by the way, your payslip looks a bit like this, right? And I'll run through what each of the line items mean and what they contribute towards. Yeah. And that stays fresh in their mind, because they're then going into the workplace, or they've had that session in the workplace, and they have a better understanding of what they're doing and their pay and what that means and what they should be doing with their pay, and how they might consider using that money.
And then they can apply that here and now rather than something later in the future.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. So you've seen probably a lot of people, you've discussed with a lot of people. So let's talk specifically about Muslims. What are the kind of issues that you've seen with Muslims, and then how can we change and grow essentially the Muslim pound?
Bro, this is why I love like your branding and like the rebrand that you've done as well, and the topic of the Muslim pound, because A couple of years ago, I think, because Millennial Money is like it's a secular brand, really. Like my co-founder is non-Muslim as well, although like we have very similar views when it comes to money in general. Apart from obviously he can engage in riba, I can't. But when it comes to money in the Muslim community, I think I had a bit more of like a focused thought a couple of years ago, where I was like, I need to engage more with this because of my own personal experiences as a Muslim who experiences money and then obviously is in this space when it comes to personal finance, financial literacy, and how it all comes together. I actually remember speaking to Arib about this, about how me myself, I didn't realize, like I sort of learned about money in like the broad conventional way. And then like I was becoming more financially literate and I got myself into a fairly comfortable position. I was investing money. I had a good amount of savings. I felt comfortable when it came to my finances. And then I was like, wait, there's a whole lot of stuff I didn't consider because I'm Muslim. Like I need to think about my money slightly differently, right?
In what way?
So even like screening my investments, for example, understanding my pension, right? And what that means. Is it completely right for me to, and I got down the line and then I kind of had a moment where I was like, right, I need to take a few steps back and understand how my money works with a sharper focus on the fact that I'm Muslim, right? Because we are provided with great opportunity as well, but also there are rules that we need to stick by and understand why we need to stick by them, right? So I had to step back and be like, okay, are my investments even Sharia compliant? Are they even halal, right? And because I just didn't know, it was ignorance, because I obviously learned the conventional way. And then I took a step back and had to re-educate myself and really understand what it means to manage your finances as a Muslim as well. And obviously we think about the lack of resources in the conventional money system, right? For Muslims experiencing money, it's a whole different world. And alhamdulillah, now there's loads of other resources becoming available. And long may they continue, and I hope all of them are hugely successful. So one of the big things I think is misunderstood within the Muslim community is that poverty is piety, especially in the South Asian community. And that is fundamentally not Islamic for me. That's my view.
Sorry to interrupt. The interesting thing, I was just reading some adhkar and I was just reading the meaning of dua, and one of them was to protect from kufr and poverty in the same line. Yeah.
It's was it Ali radiallahu anhu who used to say that dua? So, it's Allahumma inni a'udhu wal kufri wal fakri wal adab al qabr.
That's the one. And that got me thinking. Is like that's how closely they're related.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, it's true, because if a person doesn't have money, and then all of a sudden it's a non-Muslim man just giving him five. He's going to think, oh look, this person gave it to me. That's just one example. Yeah. Another example is, my Allah's not giving me anything.
Yeah. Bro, it's a really sad affair, because this obviously might ruffle some feathers as well, right? But I think like poverty, or even close to poverty, or the lack of financial freedom, right, creates desperation, right? And the reason I think my understanding of like how it can become kufr, or like be stepping towards kufr, is, this is another problem that's rife in the Muslim community, is that even any of us are weak to this, right? We believe Allah is Ar-Razzaq, right? He is the provider of any risk that we have. Do we really believe that? Because of the anxieties we have around money, and the fact that we try to normalize haram options because we're like, we don't have any other choice. But that could be a statement of kufr, you know, to say that I have no choice but to disobey Allah, right? I'm not a scholar, and I do get a bit of religious anxiety when I talk about this stuff, but this is my understanding, right? If we get to the point of, I have no other option but to engage in haram, like that is stepping towards kufr, right? Because you're not trusting that Allah is the owner of everything and will provide and can turn around any of your affairs.
That's an interesting take, because there's a lot of, in the property game, we have to buy a house with interest. Yeah,
I want to talk to you about that shortly, because I'm currently in that position, not of buying with interest, of talking to myself about the fact that Allah is Ar-Razzaq, and going for a much more expensive option, because but fundamentally with the belief that Allah will provide.
Yeah.
And like I'm in that position now, right? And I have to believe that. And I really think that, yeah, everything will be fine, because Allah will first of all see that this is more challenging for you, but you're doing this because you want to be more obedient to me.
Yeah.
That is my belief. Inshallah, may Allah accept.
That's interesting you mentioned that. Afsar Ullah came on the podcast, and he's in Islamic finance law. And he's very well known within his community. And he mentioned, and he gave a very simple example. If there was halal chicken at £3 and haram chicken at £2, what are you buying?
Yeah.
But you're not even thinking of looking at the price of it. I don't know how much the chicken in Tesco is. I just don't look at the price.
Yeah. But do you know how often I hear, I don't want, again, listen, each to their own. If people have something that they're following, like there's people that I know and I respect that. Obviously, there's great scholars that have given fatwas on these things. Who am I to say that? I'm no one, right? But the amount of times I hear but the Muslim way is so much more punitive, which in a sense, I guess the prices feel like that sometimes, right? But the reason for that is because of the liquidity in the system, etc., which people don't fully understand.
Economies of scale.
Exactly, right? But they're like, oh, the Muslims are crooks. Look, they're charging this much more. And not fully understanding that there's a reason for that, because there aren't enough Muslims engaging with the system.
Yeah.
Right? If there were more Muslims engaging with the system, then it would get better. There would be more competition.
But even then, there's only this country's got 5% Muslim maybe.
Yeah.
So even then, if every single Muslim engages with the system, it will still probably be a bit more expensive.
Yeah, exactly. But then we come back to the fact that Allah is Azad. You hope that you believe, not hope, you believe that He will provide. But yeah, it is tough. It is tough because I think we've normalized a lot of things through lack of resources and understanding, right? And remember, everyone's accountability is different. So my personal view, bro, I've thought about this. I run a brand called Millennial Money. I teach thousands of people through my content about money. I'm going to stand in front of Allah one day, and I might not have the same leeway that someone who doesn't understand money the same way I do.
Correct.
And because of that, that's why I don't judge anyone, right? I just have, even in my own household, it might be different because my siblings don't have a brand about money, right? But because of the level of understanding and the role that I've decided to play in this space, I feel like I have a greater responsibility, even if it's harder for me, to take an alternative route. And inshallah, I think things will change. I spoke to Raza at FIDA. There's obviously many other options that are coming. And I said to you, I was like, bro, what you're doing is so important. And he even said that when he started FIDA, he had a Hajj experience, right?
And he felt it was his responsibility.
It was his responsibility. And you think, okay, the guys at IFG, who I greatly respect and know and speak to as well, they have a responsibility, right? And there's going to be more, as the intellectual capital is growing, there's going to be more options, inshallah, that will come to the fore. But it may require some of us to take a short-term sacrifice. There will be long-term gain, inshallah. But yeah, that's my take. One of the problems I would say in the Muslim community now is forgetting some of our core principles because we don't fully understand them, right? It does feel unfair if you don't understand why it's set there, right? It feels unfair that people can just go out and get Riba-based mortgages and just do whatever they want, right? Or not just mortgages, loans, engage in these industries and do whatever they want. But if we understand why it's discouraged, or not even just discouraged, why you're told to stay away from it, right? Then you don't feel it as much. So for example, and I kind of touched on it loosely when I spoke to Arib, there are many things that suggest that the riba-based banking system, which ultimately, the way to think about it is exploitation, right? Interest ultimately is exploitation. And the exploitation, if you were to chase it all the way down, can be the trace or the root cause of a lot of the problems that we're seeing internationally inflicted on Muslims around the world.
Okay, how? So if you're to simplify it for someone who doesn't understand the system.
Okay, I quoted this in Sami Handi's podcast and when I spoke to Arib as well, right? Look at what's happening in Sudan, right? And subhanAllah, it's horrific, right? Part of, not entirely, part of what caused that is because of Sudan's insistence previously of rejecting the normalization of a riba-based banking system, not just in Sudan, but in other Muslim lands. You know what's part of what's happening in Sudan? Part of it, the RSF are being funded by the UAE. which is meant to be a Sunni Muslim country, right?
Yeah.
And that's because, partly again, obviously the exploitation of the gold and the resources in Sudan is because the UAE supports, in certain instances, riba-based models, which help their own economy, right? And us upkeeping certain riba-based or contributing to certain riba-based banking systems in some way through certain means can be supporting these institutions, right? Obviously, that to some people might seem really far-fetched, but if you trace these things back and think about what you're upholding by contributing to these systems, right? Because in the same way, people are like, oh, what can I do? Like, said 2 million people, right? What can I do? I'm just one person, said 3 million people.
It's like boycotting Starbucks. It sounds like if only by one coffee a week, what does it do?
But imagine if I don't know 100,000 people had the alternate view. This is a bit harder for me, but may Allah reward me. He said 100,000 people. Bro,
That's a massive difference.
that's going to be incredible. 100,000 people putting that much money into, I don't know, the Muslim banking system, for example. Suddenly, there's an influx of cash, and suddenly they can do loads of home purchase plans straight away.
Yeah.
You know? Equally, if we think about exploitation, we think about what's happening in Congo, right? Which they call modern day slavery in the mines, right? And again, it comes from businesses that are highly leveraged with riba-based loans that are financing their businesses that need those materials and resources. And because people are putting the profit, because they're highly leveraged through loans, they're forcing down the supply chain, basically, that you need to extract this for me because I need to somehow be able to make my promise on these loans.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
And say, okay, someone in this country is going to say, okay, that's in Sudan, that's in Congo.
Yeah.
But how is that system affecting me today, here?
Everything is globalized and completely interrelated.
So how is the UK system affecting the cost of living crisis? Because I believe that interest-based system is affecting John down the road.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about this random person.
Right. Okay, I like that question, and then I also want to play the alternative view, because fundamentally we believe as Muslims, right, the systems that we have instructed by us, we believe is a rahmah to the whole world, right? They actually are going to solve problems for everyone, not just Muslims.
Yeah,
they're meant to be for everyone, right? And if they are properly applied, they will help everyone. So ultimately, us coming up with these more innovative solutions is going to solve problems for the world. I think in the past I talked about how there was a really resourceful emir of the caliphate who basically was so good at collecting zakat and distributing zakat that it got to a point where no one had anyone to give zakat to anymore, right?
Yeah.
And it was such a fair system of taxation, right? Imagine if that was applied on a global scale, it would end global poverty, because suddenly, like, the wealth is equally distributed, or not equally. It's not communism, like it's fairly distributed, so that there isn't anyone that is so like far down suffering when there's people that have so much that they don't need, right? And you mentioned about John down the road suffering from the cost of living crisis, and how the application of our systems would improve that. Again, I think like you're seeing prices being pumped because of the fact that we, like, so let's say the recent rises of costs was because of the energy crisis that we had. Obviously, the Ukraine invasion, which caused that and triggered that as well, which put prices up. Again, we don't necessarily support that invasion that happened, right? And the support that was then given for that, and the shock that we had to suffer, and then the UK as a whole had to suffer. That, for a lot of people, that had nothing to do with me. But it shows that globally we are interlinked. We're completely reliant on one another. You can't say that, how does what I'm doing in Britain affect Sudan or UAE? Fundamentally, everything is interlinked, and there's huge direct impact on economies because of something that's happening elsewhere in the world. Because they're not isolated from one another. And actually, if they become isolated, which is the threat now with Trump coming in, then there's greater problems at play.
So then, how does a person live in this country, in the UK, with everything that's going on in the world? Because there's a lot more than the two wars that are mainly on the news, the Palestine and Russia, Ukraine. Everything's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
You name it, Yemen, Congo, Sudan. I'm sure there's one in South America, I can't remember which country. And it's just everything's just going on. So, and then the people here, whether you've got Ahmed, whether you've got a 70-year-old Deirdre, example, living by herself, she doesn't know whether to heat up her house or have food. Ahmed is 20 years old, he doesn't know what to do with his life. He's just like, with a defeatist mentality because of where he can't see himself buying a house in the next 10 years. And he's scared if he buys in 20 years, it'll be £1 million rather than £500,000. Yeah. So what do these people do right now?
So I actually heard something that you mentioned, which is the first thing that sprung to mind when you said that is what you've described, some of these problems, is actually a symptom of the breakdown of community. And I've heard actually on a podcast that you sat down and talking about the breakdown of community and how people have become so isolated and separate from one another. What you've described is the fact that as a society, we've completely forgotten about our old and also completely sacrificed the future of our young, right? And that's because everyone's self-interest. That is fundamentally a broken society. It's obviously entirely un-Islamic because what we're taught to do is to look after our shabab and make sure that we raise them well and also to look after our old, right? And that is done through functional communities. There's a problem with loneliness, particularly in communities outside of ours, for the elderly. It's really sad. Like when I actually hear about some of the stories, like the loneliness of old people, but also young people feel like they've been fleeced by the elder generation. I did a podcast with the ex-chairman of UBS, and he talks about this because he's a boomer, right? And incredibly wealthy, and he basically wrote a book called The $100 Trillion Wealth Transfer, which is about to happen between boomers and our generation, which is going to fundamentally change the world. And he said the big problem in society now is that there's mudslinging between the old and the young, right? Because the young are like, oh, these lot, look, they inherited like amazing economic conditions, they bought property for like £5,000 and now they're worth millions. And this generation looks at us and think we just complain all the time and we're lazy. Right? So there's just constant intergenerational mudslinging where everyone thinks whatever this group does is a bad idea, whatever this group does is a bad idea. But a functioning community will be able to take from both and basically support one another. When it comes to, so for example, we should have, again, I don't want to create a new financial model, but a healthy way for the transfer. That transfer of wealth is going to happen anyway. But as it stands, it's going to create more inequality in society because those that have wealth is going to go into small pockets and people are going to keep hoarding wealth, right? And those that don't are just going to feel like, wow, how am I ever going to acquire this? Yeah. The pie is just getting smaller and smaller. But if we were to be able to have like a system which practically transferred wealth between generations, again, it seems to sound really socialist.
Yeah, so how are you thinking of
the transfer of wealth? So I'm not someone that is big on punitive taxation, right? But I think there's elements of like the state that could be better utilized, right? So for example, a system whereby maybe offering more affordable housing for a younger generation they're finding it much more difficult to buy property. The state can actually do that. I know they tried kind of with the Help to Buy scheme and stuff, but more options like that where you're actually giving the benefit of the doubt to younger people. I've seen suggestions of like, for the first 10 years of someone's career, say they don't pay tax, right? Because that's their wealth accumulation stage. And then later on, maybe they can make up for that. The opposite is actually true for young people now. We have a graduate tax, those that took out student loans, right? Yeah. For the first time, they're actually paying an additional tax that previous generations didn't have to pay. And then for the elderly, rather than them feeling like, oh my God, who's going to look after me when I reach X age, the care system needs to be reformed properly so that the elderly actually feel sufficiently optimistic that when they reach old age, they're not just waiting to die. You know, it's really sad that a lot of people who are in the elderly generation now, they basically, in certain environments, I know there's loads of different types of care for the elderly, but in some places, they're basically just there like waiting waiting to die. Their family don't really come to see them. They don't know if they have family anymore, that they're engaged with them. But better options for our old and the young. I'm not an economist, so I can't tell you exactly what that would look like. But there's different models that I think could work. We just have to be really bold and innovative, I think, to tackle both of those areas.
So basically, you're saying UK is a broken society for everyone, apart from maybe the super wealthy.
Yeah, or those that were able to acquire real assets at a reasonable price. So like a generation that could do that, and certain families maybe that could do that. But I think, and this is very broadly speaking, and for me, I think if you look at it, if you take like a proper step back, it's the old and the young that are like really suffering for different reasons. The young because they feel like financially they're in a real difficult position with like loads of constraints and challenges. The elderly because of things like loneliness, care, their health, but also the wealth transfer element. So the UK has inheritance tax, right? And you just think, I've paid tax my whole life. My whole life I've paid tax. And then after I die, you're still going to tax me, right? So not even death helps you escape taxes, right? But I heard a podcast the other day, and this tax expert, he was basically saying that inheritance tax is for rich people that never trusted their kids. Because if you were to pass that wealth on whilst you're living, you avoid inheritance tax. But it's like what are the sufficient ways of doing that? And think about how much money goes in inheritance tax, right? And the state might say, that's good, that's money that needs to be recirculated back into the government purse, right? Leave it up to people to take that how they will, right? But maybe there could be a system where the elderly find good ways that they support whilst they're alive to transfer some of their wealth, which otherwise would be tax, right? And effectively just be taken by tax to support younger generations. So even you talked about like a cooperative, right?
Yeah.
Ways to come together, and like functioning communities would find ways to come together for the elderly to feel cared for, and for the young in society to feel supported so they could get a leg up, which existed for many, many years, and in different communities still kind of do exist. We just spoke about the committee, right? And there's loads of different names for it, where people basically, yeah, we do. But people basically pool their money, and then each month someone has the turn to take the pot, and then they keep contributing to the pot as well, which helped a lot of people in the past like get married, to buy homes for the first time, and to do that in a way that has no interest involved, right?
Essentially a saving pot.
Exactly. And there are products now that are coming to market, which is basically taking that concept and trying to bring it to a more broader society, basically.
But then this also, you can apply it to business as well, because for example, if you drive down Ilford Lane, how many chai shops there are?
Yeah.
One of the first ones was Chaiwala.
Yeah.
But if a lot of these chai shops were like, rather than starting from 0 to 100, Chaiwala has a blueprint. There's two ways: either open a franchise in a different area, or just invest with them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they'll be open to investment at the rate they're expanding.
Yeah.
And people kind of, I think there's an ego element to it, that everyone wants my own brand, even if it's the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you're going to change something, or it's a complete new concept, or whatever it is. But working together, them two chai shops next to each other don't work together.
Yeah.
I don't see a way.
It's so interesting. And do you think as Muslims we're encouraged, or like, do we have the Muslim pound front of mind?
No. But I think here it comes from an immigrant mindset, because my grandfather came to this country to survive. That was his first. That was his objective. I just need to provide for my wife. I just need to provide for my kids. Then my dad's first gen here, so when he came, he had that same mindset. But then now it's down to me and you to thrive, because we're at that generation.
We're just standing on their shoulders, right?
And then our generation and the next generation have to really think, okay, the community now have to thrive.
Yeah.
And we're lucky enough that our parents, grandparents have worked hard enough that we're in a position that, yes, we can thrive. But I also think families need to work together. There's less and less family businesses, and one of the reasons is probably one you mentioned: trust. People don't trust each other. But if you think about it, if you've got a family, or if you've got, for example, your father had a business, if he's making X amount, and then you guys, rather than starting at the bottom, you're starting over here, and then your kids will start over here, providing you follow the same blueprints, and obviously, like you said, the risk is from above. So, but that pot just grows and grows, and then naturally you'll give back to your community.
Yeah,
as Muslims, we have that within us. Who gives the most charity in this country?
Yeah, it's the Muslims. Exactly.
And we only got 4-5%.
Exactly, it's so true, and obviously we know that again. That is another thing that is taught by us, and most Muslims have the experience. I know I certainly do of Sadakah being not just a purifier of your wealth; it increases your wealth, and I've seen that in my life so much. And it's a secret weapon that we have, basically, which we firmly believe as well. Like when you give, especially when it hurts to give, almost, you firmly in the belief that it will come back to you multiplied. And I think that kind of behavior is built into us anyway. And like you said, as we have to trust that as Muslims begin to earn more money, it will come back. Again, people do give more freely. I've experienced it in my life, and that's part of being grateful, right? And expressing shukr is that when you are blessed with a bit more wealth than you perhaps had before, that you do give a bit more freely.
And also what we're seeing is we're seeing a big shift in terms of, you've got, like, just look at the Islamic finance space. You've got Arib, you've got Kestrel, you've got Nesta, you've got IFG, you've got FIDA. You're seeing a lot of companies being founded. But 20 years ago, IFG and Kestrel would have been like, nah, we're not talking to each other. And now they're working together and they bounce off each other. And they're very niche in terms of what they do. IFG is a lot more obviously content based, and they have their own sister brand, Curate. Curate and Wahid, essentially, they still talk to each other. They're competitors. So we're seeing that change, and working together is only going to help. Absolutely. And you need the competition.
Absolutely. And actually, funny you say that. So Mohsin, who's IFG and Curate co-founder, he actually said to me himself, he was like, technically Wahid and Curate are competitors, but they also contribute to each other's success because of the industry in general is small enough. It's small now, right? And they need both of them to do well, to encourage more people to come in and invest with them, right? To invest within the Muslim space, and within these like Muslim friendly options, right? One of them doing badly spooks others, right, from engaging within this space. So Mohsin said that himself. He was like, even we want the competition to do well as us, which is an amazing way to think, and that we need more of that thinking.
And at the end of the day, like you said, when you have more competition, especially with them people at the helm, they're very smart. They're going to be more and more innovative.
100%.
And they're going to grow. And then you've got FIDA, who's come, like, he's blown away. He's like finance or home purchase plans. He's come with a completely different model. Which I think is probably the best model.
100%
as
agree.
he could do in this system. Maybe if he did it in a I don't know, Saudi, Kuwait, it would be a bit different. But
100% agree. And I spoke to Razan and told him that actually. And I just hope that within a couple of years or even sooner, that there's so much liquidity within the system that FIDA can just be offering out more and more and more options. Inshallah. And this is what people need to understand. And maybe it's worth, if there's something that people take away from this, obviously you're in the property sphere. A lot of Muslims, they have ambitions to buy property, right? The reason why sometimes it feels like it's more expensive to go for the Muslim-friendly option, the Sharia option, is not because they're trying to profit more from people, right? That's a misunderstanding. It's because there's not enough people engaging in the system. So the money that they have to play with, the capital that they have is much less. Obviously, it's much less than the conventional system. If more money came into it, we hope that it's going to, first of all, mean that more and more people are able to benefit from them. And also, it could drive down prices, right?
Of course.
But it requires active participation from everyone. So that's why, I think earlier you said about, like, what role do I have to play in this, right? It actually requires active participation from everyone. So everyone to believe in the systems and actually invest in these systems as well, and be a champion of these systems.
I think in the future, we will see some kind of platform where, like, we can all come together properly, and there's a clear system and a clear strategy and a clear guideline to move forward and help each other grow. Right now, I think it's very, what's the word?
Separate.
Yeah, it's very separate.
Isolated.
Yeah. So there's no
Disparate.
unified system.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying. But going onto the home purchase plans and Islamic finance, it's the same way why Tesco, Audi, Morrison's are cheaper than a newsagent.
Yeah, absolutely.
The corner shop only has that locality, whereas Morrison's are national. So
yeah, that's true.
It's the same reason. Yeah. So it comes to an education element, which is what you're trying to bridge.
Yeah. I think everyone has their role to play, right? Because and which is something that I've grown to understand as well. Like some people will be, your role is actually to do the education. Others actually, you need to use your mind for the innovation, right? And there's others whose skill set will be to bring X and Y to market. But everyone needs to understand that they actually do have a role to play. Yeah. You know, they do. Whether it's for some people, it might just be participation. Then we know that some people are blessed with a lot of wealth, and you're going to be accountable for that wealth, right? Whether you have a lot of wealth or you don't have a lot of wealth, you're accountable to it, right? And that's why they say there's almost greater accountability when it comes to wealth, but there's greater opportunity to benefit with the wealth, right? And for some people, don't underestimate how you spend your coin. It can have a huge impact on society at large.
Oh, now I know what we were talking about before this rabbit hole. We were talking about poverty.
Yes, poverty being piety.
Yeah. So to go back on that, because that's a very important topic, because when we're younger, that's basically what we're told. Like, if you have too much money, you're chasing the dunya and stuff like that. That's what we're told in madrasa. But as you're getting older, you realize, no, but you need money for everything. When it comes to building a masjid, you're asking for money.
Yeah.
So the core fundamental building of a locality, you're asking for money. So you need money for something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So are you seeing that mindset of poverty is piety within the Muslim you're speaking to? Or like a lack of ambition because they're worried that...
There's a lot of fear. I think in our generation, maybe from the people that I experience, luckily, like I've been fortunate, especially now, like the people I speak to, like yourself, like people who are actually being, trying to encourage change within this space, the founders that we mentioned of all of these amazing companies, I think are trying to challenge that concept. A lot of other like content creators that I'm friends with, Muslim content creators as well, I think are challenging this concept of poverty as piety, because it's not true, by the way. Like, but if you are struck with poverty, alhamdulillah, that's also something that we accept, and there's a reason for it. There's wisdom in it. I pray that I'm not tested with poverty because I feel like I'm better without poverty, right? And I feel like I can do better without it. For some people, they might be destroyed by wealth, so Allah doesn't give it to them, right? But we have to remember, even if we follow the Salaf, right? A lot of them were very, very wealthy, and Islam would not spread without wealth. And we relied on the wealth of the early Sahaba for Islam to thrive the way it did. We need money. We need money to be able to benefit the Ummah as well. By benefiting yourself, you can benefit the Ummah, right? So don't see it as like, oh, chasing wealth, or look at me, I'm being distracted. Of course, there is that risk as well. Too much of anything is bad. But if you do it with the right intention to benefit the Ummah, your family, looking after your family, making sure that they're sufficiently educated. Like I look at it, even in my own household, right? My dad came from very humble beginnings himself, managed to make something of himself. The wealth that he had, he invested in his 3 children. And inshallah, alhamdulillah, that is paying off now. And we are then trying to contribute that to the Ummah ourselves, right? My sister, she's studying to become a doctor. My brother, he's very entrepreneurial and business-minded himself, works in fintech space. Me, I'm trying to do all of these other things as well. That came from that early investment from my parents into the children and then benefit the Ummah, inshallah, right? And you have to have that kind of view in that the wealth, if used the right way, has a huge, huge exponential knock-on benefit with the Ummah. And don't assume that poverty means piety, because that can in itself be a test as well. And I think it's something that Muslims, maybe from a prior generation, suffered from a little bit, maybe because of circumstances, I don't know. Maybe because poverty was more common, and it was easier to suggest this is how we cope with poverty, right? Because obviously we're not that many generations into this country, right? So poverty was much more common within our communities. a few generations ago. And maybe it was a way to cope as well, to be like, okay, we're the ones tested with poverty, but that's not a bad thing. Now we might have the opportunity for wealth, and we should, because we have way more opportunities and resources than our parents and grandparents to accumulate wealth and then use it the right way, right?
And we have more knowledge at our disposal.
Exactly.
Because our parents might not know about the stock market or didn't know how to invest.
Yeah,
and stuff
exactly.
Like that. Now we know about stock market, property. You've got fractional shares in property now, crowdfunding. You've got Bitcoin and crypto. People invest in everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree.
So what's one tip you would give to anyone watching just about looking after their money and spending their money?
I'd say that the main thing, and this is a reminder to myself as well, right, is switch your mindset to being intentional when it comes to your money. That means I'm not saying don't spend your money, right, or don't invest your money, but like understand why. Like you might, it's not haram to buy nice things, by the way. This is another thing. If you can afford it, I've listened to Sheikh say now, which is amazing. Like, I'm happy to hear it. Like people think that like spending money on clothes and looking nice, if you're doing it to show off, obviously it is a bad thing. But Allah is al-Jamil as well. He likes to see, if he's given some like wealth to his creation, like beautify yourself. Like it's also befitting to beautify yourself. Yeah, it's not always showing off. And if you know you're not showing off, do it, because you might be inspiring others, right? You might be inspiring other Muslims. Like, whoa, like I can do this as well. Like I can be, you know?
Yeah.
So I would say be intentional, understand, and don't fall into the traps of other people's judgment. You know between yourself what you're trying to do with your money, but be intentional about it and don't be careless, because if you go into carelessness and heedlessness, that's when it's an issue. But if you're intentional about your money, you will focus and you will be like, okay, this part of my money is to be enjoyed. This part is for my future. This is what I'm going to spend towards X or Y. And once you're intentional about your money, because one day you're going to be held to account for it, you're prepared. You're prepared to be held to account. You might make mistakes, but you'll be able to answer the questions, right? What did you do with this money that I gave you?
Yeah, intention is very important, and it's that double tap on Apple Pay to order food.
Oh yeah,
and it's that slip of 5 seconds. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah,
it's gone 30 quid down the
drain.
drain.
Every time, bro. It's always 30 quid as well.
Yeah,
it's always 30 quid.
Before it used to be £1.20.
It's so funny you say that, because I was thinking
4 wings and chips was
I was thinking this yesterday, because I had a busy day at work. And I just didn't have time to cook, and I was with my brother as well. I was like, let's just order today. It's £30 every time. It's always $29.97.
Yeah.
Like whatever you order, it's always £30.
Maybe we just need to eat less.
Exactly.
Probably.
Exactly.
One final question: what legacy do you want to leave behind?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would like to. I think one that actually like encourages people to challenge themselves a little bit. I think I'm thinking in the frame of Muslims, right? I would hope that we can like challenge ourselves enough to be like, we can actually achieve more, right? We can do a bit more. So maybe something that I have said or done prompts people to be like, maybe I have a role to play as well. Through like the very small things that I do, right? I don't know if that's a legacy, but if there's anything that I ever say that is beneficial, obviously it's from Allah. And if it can prompt people to think, maybe I have a role to play as well in all of this, then that would be good.
I think that goes down to you're challenging people to kind of enlarge their visions and to be the best they can be.
Yeah.
And have impossible visions, which at this moment in time you think I cannot achieve. But our duty is to take that step, and then Allah will do the rest.
100%. And bro, just to add a small thing to that is, I've experienced that in my own life. This is going to sound crazy, right? There was a moment in time where I remember thinking, subhanAllah, and astaghfirullah, may Allah forgive me. I remember thinking like, how am I ever going to save 10 grand? Like that is, to me, 10 grand was like £1 million, bro. It was like, in a city like London, because I was like living out, I was paying rent, I was very social, I was like eating out all the time, and I was like, how am I ever going to save 10 grand? That is so obscene. And if I could tell you what that felt like to me at the time, that is how like far away I was to like my level of literacy now. And to think that there was that person there, and now I'm this commentator on the internet telling people about money, it's night and day. But your circumstances and what you know and understand of the world can be changed in an instant. So like you said, whatever you think feels impossible now, like might be brought right in front of you and taken away from being something in your imagination.
And also, just to add to that before we finish, is to have a long-term vision. And if we go back to our grandparents and parents, their vision, they probably didn't have a vision of seeing their grandkids and great-grandkids be entrepreneurs and doing really well and helping the community. That probably wasn't their vision.
Yeah.
But just them taking their steps on a flight to come to this country, working in factories 24/7, that's what they've achieved.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So imagine being intentional with your vision and what you can actually achieve. Niaz, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
And see you soon, inshallah.
See you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.